It's great to be with you virtually, although I'd obviously prefer to be with you all right now. Despite the distance, I would love to hear from you with your reactions to this presentation, or if you want to learn more about how we think about the economics of AI. Just get in touch. My email address is there on the screen, and I'd be happy to discuss further. My name's Shaun, and before joining Dataiku, I was head of data science and business intelligence at Cox Automotive here in the UK. And before that, I was a consultant at Optimal BI in Wellington, New Zealand. What I'll be discussing today is a problem in the way business cases for AI are often built and how to correct it. We see organizations do this often, and part of their journey with us is to move beyond the kind of thinking that I'll critique here. It's worth noting from the outset, there's nothing proprietary to Dataiku in this presentation, so if the ideas do resonate and are helpful, please use them whether you're a customer or not. So having just said this won't be about Dataiku, I do want to make sure you know who we are, which is a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for the second year running for data science and machine learning platforms. We have customers of many sizes, including household names across different industries and parts of the world, and we have a rapidly growing presence in Asia Pacific too. If you would like to know more about the reasons Gartner named us leader, you can get a free copy of the 2021 report on our website or ping me afterwards. Okay, so what's this problem that we see with conventional business cases for AI? Well, if you think about it, it can take an awful lot of convincing your stakeholders to invest in an AI initiative. Think about all of the people and technology you need to account for, and pretty quickly the costs can add up past $1 million if you're going from a standing start. And because of those really high upfront costs, you have to sell some really high value use cases to the business to get their backing. Maybe you can use AI to radically improve personalization of recommendations on your website, increasing average order size and so increasing revenue. Or perhaps with a smarter approach to fraud detection, you can significantly reduce losses in your e-commerce operations. Or any one of the other specific use cases on the screen there. They could be really high value in your context. But what this means is that your whole initiative is like a highly leveraged loan. You've borrowed quite a significant sum from the business up front, promising far greater returns in the future if they have faith that you'll deliver. Now, there's plenty of stories out there about when the business plan doesn't play out as it did on paper and the stakeholders call in those loans and the whole thing collapses. I won't discuss those kinds of failures today. Today, what I want to talk about is the problem that this approach to business cases generates even if it is successful in delivering these first few use cases. Plenty of AI initiatives are not surviving and thriving beyond the success of those initial use cases. But why is that? Well, we call this problem missing the value below the waterline. If you think of the iceberg, where the great majority of the mass is actually below the water, the same is true of the potential value of AI to your enterprise. Yes, obviously, to find the iceberg in the first place, you do need to look out for those high value initial use cases that do stick out of the water. But looking only for those, only at the obvious, easy and high value use cases is deceiving, as we all know they are not actually that common. They will run out. Your initial investors will actually be quite happy with their returns on those use cases. They'll go on their merry way. And IT as well will look in their program overview and just see the highly successful projects that you already delivered. And they'll also think that the job is done and dusted. But what they miss, but is that AI actually needs to become a capability that's embedded in every part of your organization and not just this special event, special kind of project. In fact, the work of using AI to transform your business, it's not like refreshing the website or opening an office in London or even migrating to the cloud. The work of using AI to change your business is actually never done. But you won't be very popular if after that initial success, you now go back to them for additional funding to pursue additional use cases that did not qualify as obvious, easy, and high value up front. So in investment terms, it's not enough to simply repay the loan on those initial use cases. You need to pay back the interest and build something that will survive and grow beyond your initial startup period. If your investment case, if your business case is only around the tip of the iceberg, of course, that funding will dry up, even if you're successful, and your team will leave and do more interesting work elsewhere. In the rest of today's presentation, I'll share with you how we articulate the escape from this trap, which is all about surfacing up the opportunity that's hidden below the waterline, surfacing up that value from the very beginning of your journey. And we'll escape this trap in 3 stages, like climbing a complex mountain. So before scaling any mountain, it really pays to have a vision of why you want to get to the top. With a mountain, of course, it's enough to say, because it's there. But that won't work in most organizations or any organizations with your AI business case. So we believe that an enterprise AI initiative should set the lofty goal of scaling to augment and optimize processes everywhere in your organization, not just specific use cases. This will mean hundreds of people building thousands of use cases, all making small contributions perhaps that might themselves appear unremarkable. They certainly wouldn't have qualified in your initial use case dredging operation, but together they add up to something that really matters. This prize can be really transformative, but its value can't be articulated the same way as it was for those initial use cases because it's below the waterline. In a moment, I'll offer some ways to quantify this value to your stakeholders so you can tell that story early and often. Okay, once you know why you want to get to the top of a mountain, you obviously need to start somewhere and run hard and fast at those early use cases that form the tip of the iceberg and deliver them successfully. I won't discuss this stage further today because really most people are doing this well enough. I'll say that the reason we say remove friction here is that you want maximum momentum from those initial use cases as you try and push up the mountain. So the focus today is on building business cases that will outlive those initial use cases. That momentum will run out and you need something to keep propelling you. As I hinted in my opening, initial success, even wild success, doesn't guarantee lasting success with AI. Exhausting as those use cases would to deliver initially, they won't propel you all the way to that transformational goal at the top of the mountain of realizing AI at scale. And that's because the higher you get up the mountain, the conditions change. So you need to keep maintaining the use cases that were already delivered, even though the world is changing. And then for new work, for new use cases, you're actually pushing further into the unknown, which inevitably exposes you to much greater risk. What if you suddenly change cloud provider? What if 2 competitors merge and customer behavior in your market changes significantly? What if a global pandemic hits every single time series you use in forecasting, which is something that's happened to many of us in 2020? The answer that we propose is that you mitigate these risks ahead of time, just as you would any other risk, by building resilience, which is simply the ability to bounce back from these external shocks and keep going. But the economic problem here, the business case problem, is that the funders of your initial use cases did not prepay for resilience. It wasn't part of what they thought they were buying. So where will you get the funding? And as resilience is a long-term investment that benefits all use cases, it really requires a different value story than the one that got you started. And this value, just like that transformative value at the top of the mountain, is also hidden below the water line. It's not obvious. Okay, now remaining time, let's don some scuba gear. Let's take a look at this iceberg under the water and try to find value stories that you can use to build a business case that gets you all the way to the top of that big mountain, where AI is just another pervasive capability of your enterprise, not a special project. The goal here is business cases that live beyond the initial use cases and allow you to keep going. So we'll start at the big, grand, transformative vision story, which on the face of it may look a bit unquantifiable, but with some imagination, you can find a way, as long as you move beyond the desire to just add up individual use cases. The value story at this level is all below the waterline. It's not based on individual use cases. It's about what you can get, what value you can deliver in addition to specific use cases. If you successfully pull off this value story, it will completely change the conversation with your stakeholders. It will lift you out of this narrow per use case project-centric discussion and argument and lobbying for funding into something else entirely. So first kind of value you can look at is simply the value of putting the data that people need to make better decisions right in front of them, instead of locking it away in silos. If you think about how much businesses accelerated their digitization in 2020, and it's not going to slow down, it's becoming even more obvious that data from one silo, one part of the business, is not really that useful by itself. And without data from other parts of the business, other silos, decision-making across silos will become increasingly paralyzed. So what you can do is take a common decision that your organization makes today, maybe quarterly forecasting, something that happens relatively frequently and relies on this coordination across silos, and actually do a small case study on how much faster that decision could be made if the necessary data was available to all those around the table to start with. Multiply that speed up by the number of such decisions made across silos, which should be a significant number, and then you have a rough order of magnitude estimate of the value of realizing AI at scale. So that's one way to quantify one sort of value story about pervasive enterprise AI. Another value story you can build, particularly useful if you spend a lot on technical resources like engineers and researchers, is about innovation. Many pharma companies, for example, have highly specialized teams handling specific parts of their innovation funnel. And in financial services, we often see people start up innovation labs in banks. Now, the problem with sequestering away innovation from the rest of the business is that you massively reduce the diversity of perspectives that you can bring to bear on a given problem. So you can actually quantify this under the waterline value by understanding the prior history of innovations in your business. Those big things that changed the business for the better, that generated a ton more value, where did they actually come from? And what kind of value did they unlock? And the chances are many of these actually came from the so-called shop floor, not from dedicated innovation teams. So find these stories about the past that will naturally resonate, try to quantify the value that they generated. And then what you can do is tell a story about how, well, if we could give everyone a lot of time back in their day, how many more of those kinds of innovations could we get per year? And a final idea is something you'll probably have to own and drive as a data leader, avoiding the temptation to use complicated technical concepts and language to really make a quite profound point about below the waterline value. So if AI becomes a pervasive way of solving problems and generating value across your organization, that is, if it becomes fully democratized, you will change the way everyone works. So imagine if everyone could access any data from any silo, find an innovation in the course of their daily work, as I was just talking about, and share that as a reusable building block with anyone else, including senior management. That would, in itself, radically improve coordination of activities across your organization and do away immediately with dozens of committees, forums, and steering groups of sometimes disengaged stakeholders who don't really want to be there but feel that they must. Try to estimate how much time different personas from management all the way down to the troops on the shop floor spend on such meetings, and then ask them what additional value they would create if you could give them back a day a week. So we've seen some of our customers do this. It's definitely possible, and it really gets the rest of the business interested in what you're proposing, because then they can think, their mind races with all the great things they could do with that day a week that they might get back. So there's 3 ideas for how to quantify under the waterline value to build a business case that will get you all the way to the top of the mountain. What about this danger zone in between that I highlighted before? So after the energizing success of those initial high value use cases, but before you reach the organization-wide transformation, there's this danger zone in between. As I mentioned before, building value stories here is tricky because it's all about mitigating risk. Let's face it, that's not a naturally energizing subject for most people. Furthermore, the economic problem is that investment in resilience, right, to handle these risks, it doesn't pay off in the same way as use cases. Building resilience prepares you for shocks and challenges that you actually hope won't happen. So our overall recommendation here is to reframe resilience away from being this expensive add-on that slows you down with negative connotations. And here's some ideas on how you can do that. The first under the waterline value to focus on here is resilience to technology change. Whether you're migrating data from an on-premise warehouse to Snowflake or changing public clouds, you must assume from the outset that the ground underneath you, that infrastructure, will shift constantly. Obviously, it ideally won't happen during the course of those initial use cases, which is all about, at that point, getting to value as quickly as possible. But soon after then, something about your technology environment will change. And the risk and the cost here is in tying your AI initiative too closely to any single way of doing things. But all of this sounds really bad. It's not an attractive message for your stakeholders to talk about these risks and these things that you hope won't happen, but you know that they will. Instead, you want to build up the value of agility in the face of this change, this inevitable change. So what if by building resilience, you actually freed the hands of those other people to make the infrastructure choices that will achieve their objectives? And there's two streams of value you can estimate here. So not only the cost that you save by avoiding costly rebuilds of the same work in different technology, right? Which we know it always costs 50 to 100% of the original build. So you can avoid the cost of rebuilds, and they can actually benefit from your ability to be agile and adapt to that changing technology much quicker. Of course, it's not only technological change you need to be prepared for in advance and build resilience for, it's business change as well. We sometimes hear about AI initiatives where the technical people talked to the business in some workshops, then went into a dark room, a black box for months and months to build something. And the problem is the longer you stay there, locked away from business feedback, whether it's good or bad, the more potential you have to run off the road, which is why the second car here is the one that has the headlights on. But the longer you wait to re-engage, the higher the psychological cost of admitting you may have taken the wrong road in the first place. And again, this value can be reframed from a negative to a positive by focusing on how deep involvement by the business, preferably hands-on, in any and all AI projects will actually increase the relevance of what you deliver, increase its impact, much more than it might slow things down. So to quantify this below the waterline value, we recommend that actually your initial use cases not be purely technical in nature. At least one of those initial use cases, or maybe all of them, should explicitly prove to the business the value of this kind of business and technical collaboration. And from that, you'll directly be able to better estimate the value of this kind of resilience. And the last one here, maybe not something you'd naturally include in business case, but it's increasingly on the agenda, something organizations are worried about. The more you use AI, the more you are delegating decisions to these models that you've built. And sometimes they go wrong, like any technology. When they do, the headlines look pretty bad for those who let this happen. And those events, they might be low in probability, but they're very high in bottom line impact. If you get fined or your name is dragged through the press alongside some really unflattering clip art of killer robots, algorithms gone mad. So these issues might not emerge. They probably won't emerge in those very initial use cases. But you need to build a story early on about what it will take to be responsible from the start. Because doing things carefully and deliberately to mitigate these risks, to build this resilience, it will slow you down initially. The positive payoff is that putting in place the relevant practices up front will actually make you more agile in the long run because you'll feel safer innovating. So just to finish here, I'll return to our iceberg and leave you with some take-home messages. First, I hope you've realized from what I've said, the value of a broader business case that's going to live beyond your initial use cases. I'm not saying those are unimportant, they are starting points, but they're really just proof points of something bigger that you want to achieve. That bigger thing, those lofty goals, can still be quantified if you get beyond use case and project-centric thinking. But that requires getting into the weeds of how your whole of your business works to find that transformative impact that goes beyond just use case value. And third, to avoid being shouted out of the room for raising the risks of AI and the need for resilience after you've already started, raise it early by reframing risk mitigation as kind of superpowers that actually increase your agility, increase your ability to find value quickly and adapt. Again, these costs can be quantified from prior experiences in your business, or you can even try and quantify them during initial use case development. Last of all, if you're interested in more on this topic, we published this white paper last year laying out some of these ideas in greater detail. And as I said at the outset, I'm very keen to hear from you directly. So please do get in touch. My email address is there. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.